hold on. Wait, what did you say there? Should you be what, or should I be what?
If we're gonna go through with this bullying thing, should I be the one with Confederate flags on my Facebook profile, or should that be you?
I think it'd be more believable since you already do live with Lucy, an inveterate and well-known racist.
That's true. Yeah.
So I think really you should be the one.
Yeah, boy, our listeners are going to be really disappointed when they find out that Lucy is a quote-unquote World War II memorabilia collector.
Ooh, she's got a lot of Nazi youth daggers. A lot.
Yeah, that's what she spends her allowance on. I can't control it. I mean, she's her own dog. She does what she wants to do.
Oh, she's a savage.
Yeah, she is a blood and soil nationalist.
Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush, and with me is Dr. Patrick Wyman. As always, today we are going to be talking to you about Lawler versus Dos Anjos. I'm going to start calling UFC cards by the fights with which they are headlined. So, UFC Lawler versus Dos Anjos is coming up this next weekend, and both Pat and I are looking forward to that. I think, Pat, we're both... probably for both of us, Robbie Lawler and Rafael Dos Anjos among our favorite fighters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in a really tight matchup, too. Like, this is a very, very, very thin kind of thing. Like, I would be really surprised if this were a blowout in either direction. They're well matched with each other. They're kind of at similar stages of their careers, too, which makes this really compelling. In a division where... there are a lot of rising fighters, but nobody has quite broken through to the top yet. Like, these guys have one last kind of chance to make a run at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of in a similar position, at least in terms of competitiveness, are Santiago Ponzinibbio and Mike Perry, who will be fighting on the main card of that same event. After that, we are going to get into our recap of the events of UFC Fresno, aka under the new model, Ufc Swanson versus Ortega, which was pretty compelling, at least what happened in the main event there, with Brian Ortega pulling out a sudden and unexpected victory, as usual. I guess we should start seeing them coming, and then we're going to get into recapping and giving our thoughts on the events of Vasyl Lomachenko's fight with Guillermo Rigondeaux, which did not play out the way I expected, but is no less worth talking about because it was very, very notable and impressive. Let's start off, though, with UFC Lawler Dos Anjos and a fight. Lawler versus Dos Anjos. As you were saying, Pat, both of these guys sort of at a similar stage in their career. Both guys ex-champions. Rafael Dos Anjos, of course, is making his continuing his venture into the welterweight division after losing the lightweight championship. Boy, how long ago was that? Was that just last year?
Yeah, that was July of 2016.
Wow. Okay, so losing the lightweight championship to Eddie Alvarez just last summer, Dos Anjos has pretty quickly put himself into position to be considered a top contender at welterweight. How did you think he looked in his... the Neil Magny fight was, of course, quite dominant, but is there anything you can draw from his last long fight that will give you an impression of how he'll do against Lawler? His fight with... oh my gosh... You know what I'm talking about. With Tarek Saffiedine.
Yeah, in his welterweight debut. Yeah, so I think a couple of things. The first is that at lightweight, Dos Anjos was really a bully. He was big and strong and physical and liked getting in guys' faces. I think at 170, he needs to be a little more of a range striker. He needs to play on his speed and his footwork and his craft at this point, which is quite exceptional. Like, in his first really like fully formed performances as a pressure fighter, it was like the Jason High fight, the Benson Henderson fight, Nate Diaz fight, even the Pettis fight a little bit. He had craft, but I wouldn't have called him necessarily crafty. He was really kind of bullish. I mean, he was smart in the way that he pressured, but he was really bulling forward. And it was really the same 3 or 4 shots in some combination. It was the left kick, especially to the body, straight left hand, and then a right hook. Those were really the shots that he was comfortable throwing. Now he's got a much more educated jab. He mixes up locations better. His rhythm is better. He's comfortable doing things other than moving forward. He can counter in the pocket with more facility than he used to. He takes better angles, and I think that's what he needs to play on here, which combines really nicely with the speed edge that he has at 170. So I think he's a little less of a pressure fighter, a little less of a kind of a bull forward into the pocket and trust that if he falls into the clinch, he's going to be the bigger, stronger guy, and a little more, okay, keep a little bit extra distance, not at the edge of range, but kind of somewhere between kicking distance in the pocket is, I would think, where he wants to be here.
How comfortable do you think he still is with that style of fighting? Because I do want to point out one thing that gives me pause. We noted, I think, as a lightweight, that Dos Anjos was very style specific in when he looked his best and when he didn't. Even though I think we both agreed that he had some very good moments from the outside against Tony Ferguson, it still was a fight in which it looked like he needed to be pressuring to really be controlling the bout and doing well. Both of the men he has fought at welterweight have not been pressure fighters. Tarek Saffiedine, Neil Magny, not exactly known for their come-forward, aggressive styles. Robbie Lawler very well could be in this fight. Can Rafael Dos Anjos maintain a long-range striking style with that, more technical finesse kind of angle he's been approaching these days? Can he maintain that with an aggressive puncher like Robbie Lawler, or could that kind of be a bit of a suicidal strategy if that's the kind of fight he's going to end up in?
So I think you raise a really good point there. But with Lawler, I don't think he has to pressure 100% of the time in order to win. I think he doesn't have to stick and move 100% of the time to win it. What he needs to do is, when Lawler takes his foot off the gas, which he will do because Lawler at this stage cannot maintain a come forward aggressive style for more than a few minutes at a time. Kind of similar to a kind of a better version of old ass Anderson Silva, like final form old Anderson Silva. Lawler can only, the post counter puncher Anderson Silva.
Okay.
The one that fought like Bisping,
Post 7th Dragon Ball Anderson Silva.
Yeah.
Final form, by the way, a little underwhelming. I was expecting more from his final form, if I'm honest.
Yeah, that's true. Well, unlike Dragon Ball Z, you don't keep getting better as you get older. But so Lawler has kind of discovered that he's still big and strong and aggressive, and he's got great timing and great footwork. And by being a little more aggressive, he can control the fight a little more than he used to. But he can't do that every minute of every fight. He doesn't have the gas tank to do it. I don't think he trusts his chin, maybe, to be in that kind to constantly put himself in a firefight, or maybe he just doesn't want to. Maybe he doesn't think he needs to. Maybe he thinks it's too risky to do that. But so that means that there will be opportunities for Dos Anjos to pressure him back in this fight. So Dos Anjos needs to survive Lawler's bursts of forward aggression, and then when Lawler takes his foot off the gas, Dos Anjos needs to put his foot down and pressure back, and kick the shit out of Lawler's legs. I think those are, if I were him, I would say you really need to attack his lead leg over and over and over again. Finish every combination with a kick, and hope that wears him down enough as the fight goes on that you've got an edge.
Yeah, southpaw versus southpaw, man. Rafael Dos Anjos has a great left kick. That outside leg kick is going to be there. Robbie Lawler, not exactly famous for his checking of kicks. Quite famously did not check any kicks in his fight with Melvin Manhoff, for example. I think I want to say something more in a moment about Robbie Lawler's. I want to try to figure out Robbie Lawler's weird rhythm of fighting. Because I think there are a lot of different ways you could explain why he takes such long times off. Is it his chin? Is it his confidence because of something like that? Is it his gas tank? Or, as I think we both sometimes have wondered, does he get bored at times in fights? Or is he just a very thoughtful, careful fighter now? It's hard to say. But countering his forward rushes, I think, is going to be very surviving, as you put it, is going to be really important. I'm interested to hear your perspective on how Dos Anjos does that. I think the clinch skills that he showed in the fight with Tarek Saffiedine could come in very, very handy there.
I think they could come in handy, but honestly, I do not think you want to be that Dos Anjos wants to be in the clinch with Robbie Lawler. Saffiedine is not an especially imposing welterweight. And frankly, from a strength perspective, neither is Neil Magny. Lawler is big, strong, and physical on the inside. I do not think Dos Anjos wants to be in the clinch with him. That, especially early in the fight, that strikes me as a really, really bad spot for him to be.
That's a good
Lawler
point. Here's something
Lawler is every bit as crafty, if not more.
Sorry, here's something I didn't know. Lawler's 3 inches taller than Rafa Dos Anjos.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize he was considerably bigger than RDA. I'd always kind of thought of Robbie as a medium-sized welterweight. Yeah,
he's not huge. I've met both of them in person. I think Dos Anjos is listed at 5'8". I think he's more like 5'9". And Lawler is listed at 5'11". I think Lawler's about 5'10". I don't think it's not much of a height difference, but Lawler is noticeably bigger. He's much thicker through the back and the chest and the legs, I think, than Dos Anjos is.
Than Dos Anjos? Dos Anjos is my thick boy.
He is low key thick. But
it's not even low key, Pat. It's very, very out there. I think he's well known for being looking like a bunch of miscellaneous wooden parts inside of a bag. You know what I mean? Just kind of stuffed into a skin bag. He's very naughty. Yeah, I think Lawler is stronger, and I think he'll have maybe 5 pounds, 8 pounds, and I think he's just kind of thicker. I don't know. It's hard to describe. Demetrius Johnson is thick when you see him in person. Robbie Lawler is thick the same way Demetrius Johnson is thick. Sure. Yeah, I know what you mean.
And Dos Anjos is not I understand to our listeners, because since this is an audio medium. Jesus Christ. I couldn't even remember the fucking word audio.
We're good at this.
Yeah, because this is an audio medium, I understand that may sound kind of weird, but it's different fighters have different looks to their builds when you see them wearing clothes like normal people. We're so used to seeing people with their shirts off that I think that kind of skews the perspective. So because our normal point of view when you see a person is not what does this person look like shirtless, it's how do they look when they're wearing clothes and what does that do? Demetrius Johnson is noticeably strong, and people I've talked to who have coached fighters who have fought Demetrius Johnson talk about how strong he is. Robbie Lawler, same deal. People who have coached fighters against Robbie Lawler have told me how just stupid strong he is. Dos Anjos is more explosive than kind of thick strong the way that those dudes are, if that makes any sort of sense at all.
So what you're saying to me, Pat, and I want to make sure I have this straight, you don't think, what does this person look like with their shirt off when you meet just an average person?
Generally, no. Maybe that makes me the weird one.
No, that's all I've ever been doing, so now I'm kind of worried. But the point...
Yeah, seek help.
The point stands. So does the question then. If Robbie Lawler is going to come forward, if he's going to, at points in this fight, put some of those crazy aggressive flurries on Dos Anjos, the kind of things he did in bursts in the rematch with Johnny Hendricks, the kind of things he did in bursts in the 3rd round against Donald Cerrone, or in the 5th round of many fights, but most notably recently against Carlos Condit, those I don't care about being hit, I'm going to explode with 6 strikes in a row, end with a kick, and make you back up. How does Dos Anjos deal with that if he can't press forward into the clinch to neutralize Lawler's aggression? Because I'm not confident that Dos Anjos has the footwork or defense to, you know what I mean, just to evade that kind of stuff at long range.
Yeah, I don't think he can. That's that to me is kind of the deciding factor in this fight. It's why, spoiler alert, I think Lawler will win, is just because unless Lawler, who is getting older, who is noticeably slower, less athletic, just looks aged compared to how he looked a few years ago, unless he has really kind of fallen down, I don't think that Dos Anjos can deal with that particular thing. I think Dos Anjos can and will have some success in those moments where Lawler takes his foot off the gas. I think Dos Anjos will exploit those. I think he'll really try to put it on Lawler. But but when you go after Lawler, Lawler can stand his ground, pick his shots, and counterpunch in a way that I think that Dos Anjos is much less effective at doing. Now, the pace is going to be the deciding factor here. There will probably be, if this goes the distance, there will probably be rounds where Dos Anjos outlands Lawler 4-1, And Lawler could still win a decision on the basis of being more effective in those spots if he doesn't knock Dos Anjos out. Much like the Cerrone fight, we've kind of seen this dynamic play out where Lawler will just take rounds off and Lawler will take minutes off, And in those spots, you can do work against him. The question is whether it's going to be enough work. I just kind of tend to think that Lawler is going to be so much more effective in those spots where he can pressure. And he can, and like also, if we're looking at the straight offense versus defense matchup here, I think Dos Anjos' defense is a lot like Lawler's, but less effective. So Dos Anjos' defense, if you're a crafty strike and organic striker the way that Lawler is really good at picking and choosing shots, right? And finding angles and slipping shots around your guard and under your guard and through your guard and working the body if you've got a high guard. That's like Dos Anjos' defense is built for a guy like Lawler to exploit, I think.
Because it's just going to be flashing up a double high guard when he's in close and giving somebody like Lawler openings to snake shots through.
Exactly. Like, I think Dos Anjos' defense is really effective against a guy like Donald Cerrone, who's more rote with the combinations that he throws. Like, Dos Anjos' defense is effective, but it's effective because it's just kind of like he's going to take the worst off of a lot of shots that you throw, and he's going to block a lot of them. Where he's not necessarily seeing the shots that are coming in. He's just like, it's like a percentage thing. You know?
Yeah. It's very kind of predictive. Like, this is just, he's rote in that way. If we're going to use our classic terminology, like, after you throw the left hand, you block, and then after you feel something hit this arm, you turn the other way because the next shot's probably going to come on the other arm. It's not like I'm reading the attacks as they come in and picking them off one by one. And yeah, if you're going to compare Robbie Lawler to a past, like his punching style and how he chooses his openings to a past Dos Anjos opponent, Eddie Alvarez is kind of a favorable comparison.
Yeah, I thought of that a lot when I was doing my tape study for this fight.
Yeah, snaking those shots around and through the guard, and a lot more, I think, stylistic flexibility on Lawler's part. You know, like what kind of fight he can still pull those moves off off of his back foot, standing in the pocket, or coming forward. But I still have concerns about Robbie Lawler. I don't know. Taking a whole round off against Donald Cerrone, it's kind of a weird choice, right?
Especially because this is a 5-round fight. We know that Dos Anjos is durable. Right. Like the knockouts of Dos Anjos' career, when guys like Alvarez flattened him, when Jeremy Stevens knocked him out, those stand out simply because that very rarely happens.
Yes,
you know, like it took two tremendous, thunderous punchers to put Rafael Dos Anjos down, and Robbie Lawler is still probably that kind of puncher, but you can't take it as a given that if Lawler lands, he's going to take Dos Anjos out. So if this becomes a kind of a back and forth war of a fight over 5 rounds, Dos Anjos has a really good chance of winning that on activity.
Right. Yeah. We talk a lot about how impressive Tony Ferguson was for not getting tired in his fight with Rafa Dos Anjos in Mexico City, you know, at elevation. Sorry. RDA was in there with him, you know, like RDA was also not looking notably tired for 5 rounds in a very difficult environment. He is a very well-conditioned athlete.
Landed 21 strikes in 25 minutes. That is an insane pace.
Yeah, and it's similar to the pace that he pushed when he beat Anthony Pettis. Like, he can go for 5 rounds fighting hard, and he can do it consistently. But still, the essential problem for Dos Anjos seems to be that he does need to be coming forward to do that at his most effective. And I don't know if that's the case for Lawler. I'm still torn on this one, though, man. I thought I might come to an easier conclusion by the end of our discussion, but I still think, like, I can imagine Robbie Lawler spending 3 rounds doing nothing. And I can imagine Rafa Dos Anjos being one of the worst opponents in the UFC to do that against when he's on form. So you're going with Robbie Lawler.
Yeah, I mean, with all the reservations you just laid out, like, it's a weird. I mean, I think you and I are both trust Dos Anjos' process, right?
Sure.
Like, we there is a lot to like about what he does, and he's predictable in the very best way, in the sense that he is going to go out there and do, generally speaking, what it takes to win rounds in a fight. And if he catches you with something big, he's going to jump on you and finish you. Or if you give up your back on the ground, he's going to rear naked choke you. Like, he is. You cannot fuck up against him over and over and over again and not expect him to exploit it, because he's just relentless with his process. But Robbie Lawler, like you can't be. It's really hard to be predictable against Robbie Lawler over long periods of time.
Because very predictable. Robbie Lawler, very surprising. Sometimes that means disappointing, but always surprising in some way.
Yeah, I mean, because he's so fucking smart and so crafty. Yeah, you know. Like we talk a lot about Lawler's power and kind of his organic ability to read things, but like if you talk to Robbie Lawler about fighting, you will be blown away by his command of kind of intangible things. He understands things like footwork and rhythm and timing and when people are paying attention and when they're not paying attention and what strikes matter and what strikes really don't matter. Like the dude just gets fighting on a really basic bone deep level that very few fighters can match. Like he explained rhythm to me in a way that still sticks with me a couple of years after the fact. Like he understands things like that. And even as he has declined physically, that's why he still was able to beat like a pretty prime Donald Cerrone in his last outing. Like that was a close fight, but you know, like the fact that he's still competitive at that level at his age with as much mileage as he has on him, that is not a coincidence. That's because he is kind of an all-time great when it comes to understanding the nuances of this game.
Final question for you, and I know we'll be cutting this down, but final question. Can Dos Anjos stall Lawler out with his wrestling the way that Johnny Hendricks did?
Absolutely not.
Not strong enough?
No. Dos Anjos is not a nuanced enough takedown artist to really, I think, trouble Lawler.
That's if your estimation is correct, and I'm going to watch some footage to verify this for myself, that he's not as strong as Robbie Lawler, that will be kind of worrying, because I would say my read on Dos Anjos' wrestling is that it's very strength-based.
Yep. And it's very based on having the fence.
Yeah.
When he got Tony Ferguson down, like Ferguson in the middle of the cage was able to immediately scramble. Like he really depends on having the fence to pin your hips in place while he establishes control. So Lawler is hard to pressure in that sense. Lawler is hard to back up against the fence over and over. And if you do try and work your takedowns there, if you do try and kind of wall install him, he will hurt you for it. Like it's very, very difficult to chain wrestle him against the fence. If Dos Anjos uses the threat of the takedown to mess with Lawler and create openings for strikes, maybe that works better.
To freeze him up a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, but I think if he sells out looking for takedowns, that's just going to be a way that's going to get him into more trouble than he deserves, because he's going to get stood up. Lawler's going to spin him around, being the bigger, stronger guy, is going to spin him around, put him against the fence, jam his head into his chin, and just knee the shit out of him and elbow him. Like, I really think, especially in the early rounds, the clinch is a terrible place for Dos Anjos to be against Lawler. I could be wrong about that, but that's my read.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know. I have this niggling feeling that Dos Anjos has the skills to hang with Lawler in the clinch, even if he's a little outstrengthed there, because the clinch fighting he showed against Saffiedine was kind of a new look for him. And
but you got to give Lawler outfought Matt Brown in the clinch for long stretches.
God, that's true.
Lawler
true.
outfought Carlos Honda in the clinch. Lawler outfought for some stretches that fight Donald Cerrone in the clinch. A much improved clinch fighting Donald Cerrone.
Yeah, I mean, you had me at Matt Brown. I'm sold. I mean, I'm picking Robbie Lawler now.
Yeah, and outfought Johnny Hendricks in the clinch for long stretches. This was one of the things we talked about this a little bit after the Lawler Cerrone fight, was that after Cerrone adjusted and was putting in really good work in the clinch against Lawler, Lawler adjusted by stepping back and hitting Cerrone on the entrance and the exit to the clinch. Sorry, real quick, I've got to run. There's a person down at the door.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, so Lawler adjusted to Cerrone's success in the clinch by just stepping back, by taking short steps, short angles, and then hitting Cerrone with 1, 2, 3 shots, by sneaking uppercuts under his arm, by sneaking a right hook up and over Cerrone's outstretched arm. Like, he adjusted to Cerrone's success in the clinch. And I kind of think that if Dos Anjos tries to play that same kind of game, Dos Anjos is going to run into the same kinds of problems.
Yeah. I do think there's definitely a chance that Dos Anjos if he gets the chance to put enough pressure on, if Lawler reacts the first few times to those first engagements defensively, as he sometimes does, and if he's in a weird state of mind and kind of shuts down, as he can, then yeah, there's opportunities in my mind for Dos Anjos to make some headway, but you kind of sold me. Like, Lawler, skill-wise, I think can pretty much hang anywhere with almost anyone in this division. And I'm not sure. I think Dos Anjos might be just a little too specialized for that kind of come forward fight, even today, for Lawler not to find ways around him. But still, it's a good fight. I mean, that's why it's so hard for me to parse. It's a good fight. I'm very much looking forward to it. Love both of these guys. And that does it for this first segment. So, guys, stick around. When we come back, we're going to be moving on to Mike Perry versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. You feel like I forgot that there, Pat? Who the fuck Mike Perry was fighting? All right, we'll be back with that after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Now, for segment 2, we are moving on to the welterweight fight, not the co-main event, which is Ricardo Lamas versus Josh Emmett, but the co-main event between Santiago Ponzinibbio and Platinum Mike Perry. Like the main event, this strikes me as a very tight sort of matchup, one that could very easily go either way. In fact, let me give you a little bit of these numbers were similar for the main event, but let me give you the fight metric numbers that sort of illustrate this. Let's see. Santiago Ponzinibbio lands 4.05 significant strikes per minute. He absorbs 4.13. Mike Perry lands 4.79. He absorbs 4.45. Now, if that is not a picture of two fighters who could be said to take one to give one, I don't really know what is.
The Ponzinibbio numbers are still a little bit skewed because he had that one fight with Ryan LaFleur where LaFleur kind of lightly tapped him for 3 rounds and landed like 75 strikes while taking him down a bunch. So that skews it a little bit, but still the general picture is not wrong. Like, Ponzinibbio is an offensively focused fighter. Perry is an offensively focused fighter. Neither of them is a defensive mastermind. I would say especially Perry.
Yeah, well, definitely. The slight differences between them are where this fight gets interesting. Ponzinibbio, definitely more defensively minded. We have praised his footwork in particular in past episodes, and I think it deserves to be praised. His footwork, especially when it's on, can be very, very nice. Mike Perry, much less evolved, I think, in the defensive aspect, but substantially more powerful and a pretty damn dangerous fighter to exchange with. So I think a lot of this fight is going to come down to really, it's like Perry is like this obstacle that everyone who fights him has to solve because he is so dangerous if you engage him in the wrong kind of fight.
He's like, I cannot get over how good a feel Perry has for things. Like, it's really, really stunning. I mean, like, we have watched.
Go on.
I mean, we've watched a shitload of fighters over the years, and I cannot think of more than 4 or 5 guys who have the kind of innate sense for when is the right time to do a particular thing. Yeah. That Perry does. Like, it's a really, really limited list of guys, which is kind of crazy considering he is a walking Florida man meme. But like, you would not expect him to have that. But like, his feel for his decision making in the cage is really, really, really good. He doesn't always have the tools, but he's to do the things that he knows he needs to do. But he very rarely just does an objectively wrong thing.
Sure, yeah. His power is contained, I believe, in those teardrop tattoos. I think that's really the source of this strange ability. You're right, though. Perry is one of those fighters who stands out because of the very broad umbrella term athleticism, but not just power, and not just like the explosiveness or whatever the other terms you might use to augment the word power. Perry has a very good sense for things like timing and range. He's just really, really competent in what would, for most fighters at his experience level, be really wild and frantic exchanges. Mm-hmm. He handles those things really, really well. I want to give a bit of retrospective love to Jake Ellenberger, who I thought was fighting a very intelligent, very good fight with Mike Perry. And yet, Mike Perry figured out the timing for one sort of half-clean left hook, and it was over from there. Because once Perry had Ellenberger reacting to him, he could just time him with ease. He knew exactly how to set up and place the elbow that he finished Ellenberger with. Like, Ellenberger's more fragile than most opponents, but that was kind of the picture. That was kind of the what's the word I'm looking for? Not categorical, the archetypal Mike Perry fight, in my estimation, because you can have someone who's approaching him very intelligently, and yet one mistake or one good calculation on Mike's part, and it's over. And I don't know what that says about this fight just yet. I wonder, here's my question for you, Pat. I think this is an interesting, this would be a good tactic for Ponzinibbio, would be to fight Perry sort of the way Ellenberger did. Use his footwork to stay on the back foot. This is something Ponzinibbio can do, and I think can do it fairly well, although he's often been criticized for doing it against opponents like Gunnar Nelson and Nordine Taleb, because the idea is usually that he needs to pressure those guys. Do you think he needs to pressure Perry, or would he be better served to do what Ellenberger did and try to run him around?
I think he can do either in bursts. I don't think it has to be an either-or thing. I think in terms of the predominant tack that he takes, I think he should stick and move, because he's going to have openings. He's going to have opportunities. And when he hits Perry, he needs to follow up. Like what Ellenberger struggled with, even though he was doing the right things, and what Ellenberger has frankly struggled with for a long time, is pulling the trigger and throwing enough, right? Like Ellenberger had opportunities in that fight where he could have made Perry pay for things. So when he took him down, right, there's a spot toward the end of the first round, he takes him down and Perry kind of pops back up. There were opportunities as Perry was standing back up, knee him, uppercut him, elbow him as he's standing back up. Use those points where Perry is just reacting and going on feel, and exploit that. Make him pay for those moments where Perry is just talenting his way out of things. Like where he doesn't have that craft. Ellenberger could have made him pay there, but Ellenberger is just not the kind of guy at this point who's going to make you do that, right? Ponzinibbio can. If Ponzinibbio shoots a kind of a throwaway takedown and just knocks Perry off his feet, Ponzinibbio can pull the trigger and land a three-piece combination as Perry's on his way back up or something, you know? If Perry throws a kind of a lunging right hand to cover distance as Ponzinibbio is sticking and moving, Pons can cut an angle and hit him with 2-3 shots, and then when Perry backs off to reset and reevaluate things, that's when Ponzinibbio should jump on him and pressure, right? So you want to pressure him in bursts, and you want to make you have to make good decisions when you fight Mike Perry, because he's going to make pretty good decisions about when is the right time to do particular things, about what's the right strike to throw. So you need to make better ones, and you need to exploit it when he's in those phases where he's kind of cruising on just like raw ability. Sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. The difficulty, I think, for Ponzinibbio, here's another thing, is that he's very boxing focused. And listeners of the show will know I love boxers and I love boxing. And when I talk about MMA, I tend to talk about it from a boxing perspective. But I think that is probably has a chance to be a catastrophic error on Ponzinibbio's part if he does not use what I consider to be a pretty strong kicking advantage. Ponzinibbio is actually quite a good kicker, quite a good low kicker, and more than just boxing centric, he doesn't really attack the body or legs much at all. And I think fighting Mike Perry by only trying to hit him in the head is sort of like fighting John Lineker by only trying to hit him in the head. Like the best performance anyone has had over Mike Perry so far in the UFC was Alan Jouban, who fought a perfect fight against Mike Perry. He made him chase and picked him apart from range, but he also hurt him badly to the body. Just hit him hard with kicks, hit him with knees in the clinch when he did come in too close, and just sort of tore him apart at every level. Ponzinibbio, if he's going to fight off the back foot, I think he needs to do that. I think it would be a huge mistake for him to think he needs to counterpunch or only work off of his jab, because Perry can time those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And just to add some quantitative backing to what you're talking about, against Nordian Taleb, Ponzinibbio threw 171 strikes. Only 15 of those were to the body or legs. Yeah. The other 156 were to the head. When he fought Zach Cummings, Ponzinibbio threw 152 strikes and 135 of them were to the head.
Right.
Or 126 strikes and 117 of them were to the head. So an even greater percentage. Yeah, with Perry, I think what you're getting at, Connor, is you need to take what he gives you, right?
Yes.
And you need to just be comfortable scoring. If you get into a firefight with Perry, then he's probably going to be more durable than you. He probably hits harder than you, and he's probably got a better feel for the kind of wild firefight, because he just thinks faster. Or reacts faster.
And if you dedicate a lot of your mental energy to finding ways around whatever defenses he puts up to defend his chin, you are going to become more repetitive, more predictable. Perry can time somebody who's just throwing punches at his head over and over again. He did it to Alan Jouban. He hurt him when he did get predictable in the first round. He does it to just about everybody.
He did it to Danny Roberts, who is a pretty good and crafty striker.
Yeah, and that's kind of my feeling. If Ponzinibbio cannot make those adjustments, I think this might end up looking a lot like the Danny Roberts fight, with Ponzinibbio being slightly more technical in just the right ways to stay competitive, but putting himself in the kind of fight where every 6 minutes he gets dropped by something. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah. In some ways, this is a referendum on what do you think of Santiago Ponzinibbio? Do you think, because it seems fairly clear to me that the Jouban fight aside, which caught Perry, I would say, at kind of the right point in his development where he didn't have the tools to deal with what Jouban was showing him. I think Perry is still talented enough to beat a guy who isn't fighting to the right game plan.
Oh, sure.
And so the question is, for Ponzinibbio, does he have the discipline to mix things up and use all of the tools that he has available to him, and maybe fight against type a little bit, maybe take a step back from what he feels most comfortable doing in order to give himself the best chance of winning the fight? Mm-hmm. He could win a firefight. He could just blast Perry with a combination and put him down. That's entirely possible.
We shouldn't give the impression that Mike Perry is the only guy who can just blast somebody dead in an exchange of punches. The Pons can do that shit. He did that shit in his last fight, and has done it a few times through his career. But that is Mike Perry's thing. He's very, very specifically good at winning wild exchanges and turning them into opportunities to win instantly. It's just more dangerous for Ponzinibbio, and more dangerous, specifically, it's more dangerous than it has to be for Ponzinibbio to engage in that kind of fight. I think that's what we're trying to say. Yeah. But I think he might engage in that kind of fight.
Yeah, I mean, the reason, if Ponzinibbio does the right things in this fight, I think he's a 3-1 favorite. If he fights Perry's fight, it's a coin flip,
sure. Yeah,
or maybe even slightly favors Perry. So that's why the odds are kind of where they are. I think it's Ponzinibbio minus 190 is because somewhere between those two, you get the range of potential outcomes for this fight.
Yeah. I think for our final picks, because I guess we've reached that point, I'm going to go with Ponzinibbio, and I'll tell you why. You said before, I think Perry was at the right point in his development when he fought Jouban, that Jouban was able to, catch him the way he did and outthink him the way he did. I'm not yet certain that Mike Perry has surpassed that stage of his development. He's definitely shown flashes of new things, but I have not seen a Mike Perry who seems to have changed in any dramatic way the way he fights, or shown a completely new wrinkle, a new way of moving, or a new pace that he can fight at, or something like that. I think he's still coming along relatively slowly from a technical perspective, and mentally, I think he's kind of the same guy still. And I think Ponzinibbio can maybe outthink him the way Jouban did.
Yeah, I'm also going to pick Ponzinibbio here. for that reason.
I thought you were
Actually,
go
you know
for
what?
Perry.
No, you know what? I'm going to take Perry.
All right. Okay.
Like, just I'm going to be a little bit of a contrarian here. I am not quite yet sold on Ponzinibbio as a guy who can do everything.
Sure.
At least not against the talented elite of the division. We know he can punch. We know he can do a bunch of different things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how he's going to do those things when he's put under a ton of pressure by a durable, mean, quick thinking, quick reacting kind of fighter like Perry. Mm-hmm. And you know, like, if he were more of a takedown threat, if he could mix things up a little more in that regard, I would be a little more sold. But I just think, like, it's weird to say this, but I'm a Mike Perry believer. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to win this fight, but in the long run, I think he's going to win more of these than he loses. And I think he is actually showing quite a bit of growth. I think he is showing new tools. I think he's picking up new things every time. I think his footwork is better. I think his pressure is better. I think he understands how to herd guys better than he used to. And we also know that he attacks at multiple levels and he can wear you down. If you do not stick to your game plan, if you are content to, if you have moments of mental lapse, then Perry can make you pay over the long run for those. So I'm going to take him. I think he knocks out Ponzinibbio in the third round in a hell of a fight.
But I think Mike Perry is a mental lapse.
For sure.
The thing is, I remember so clearly when he fought Ellenberger. I don't know why that fight has stood out in my memory the way it has. But I remember the commentators saying that Mike Perry had told them before the fight, you know, I'm trying to become more technical. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. You know what my big weakness is? This was Mike Perry. I mean, I guess this does show some self-reflection, but this was Mike Perry's own statement. My biggest weakness is that I have no patience. And when I fight somebody, I can't wait around too long. I have to get after them. And I think Mike Perry is still that guy. It does leave the door open for a fighter like Ponzinibbio, like the option to fight the right strategy against him, to make him frustrated, to fight him patiently. That's there. But still, to your point, can Ponzinibbio do that? Don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say what's worse for a fighter like Perry is in trying to convince yourself that you're not impatient. Like, I think if you know that you're an impatient fighter, you can build your game around making use of that and turning it into a strength, which I think is more or less what Perry does.
Yeah.
Like, he knows that he wants to get after you, so he pressures. And he pressures pretty well. And he does a better job than he used to of moving you around with, like, kicks and cutting off your angles of escape and covering distance in safer fashion than he used to, of picking his spots when you plant your feet to throw back at him, of ducking back out of range and then immediately coming back in once you think you've established distance. Like, he's not dumb when it comes to those things. Like, that's the great conundrum of Mike Perry, is that he seems like a walking Florida man meme, but he's a pretty smart fighter. Sounds strange to say those words, but I think the man deserves credit for and like, what is our greatest command, Connor, in terms of fighters? Know thyself, right? Like, that's nosce say.
We always say Latin
with it.
We always say know thyself.
But I think Perry does. I think Perry knows who he is. I don't think he's confused about that.
Yeah, there's maybe that is what should have stood out to me, is that, like, it is very rare that a fighter shows, like, a lot of self-awareness. That doesn't happen that often in public.
I mean, think about some other really gifted fighters that we've seen. Like, there's no denying, when you look at Sage Northcutt, that guy is a talent, right? Like, he is physically gifted. Mm-hmm. Do you think he has any fucking idea who he is as a fighter, or what he really wants to do, or like what his deep, dark desires are?
Oh, I think I don't know. He might know what his deepest, darkest desires are.
He maybe knows a little more about that after hanging out with Uriah Faber for a while. But like, yeah, I mean, do you think he knows? I don't think a dude like that necessarily knows who he is. We see talented fighters all the time who don't really know who they are. You know, I think it took Robert Whittaker years to figure out who he is as a fighter. Mike Perry, give the man some credit. That dude has known who he is from the second that he stepped in there.
That's fair. I mean, you're kind of selling me on Perry here. But the thing, I mean, it's definitely what
I'm more sold on Perry in the long run than I am for this fight. I'm more sold that, like, a guy with that kind of talent and that kind of feel, that if he puts himself in the right situations, which, given some of the other choices he's made in his life, is not a given, that a guy like that that there's a real future there. It may not necessarily be in this fight. It may not be in the next 3 years, but I think if you look 6 or 7 years down the road, if the guy has not found himself back in prison, has not done something remarkably stupid, or, you know, just gotten his brains bashed in from stupid training practices, that a guy like that is going to have a future. That's kind of my belief on Mike Perry.
Yeah. The only question is, does he become a champion first, or does he burn down a Jiffy Lube and get put away for 7 years?
I mean,
Who
like,
knows?
that's the range of potential outcomes that we're talking about here with Mike Perry. I don't know. Like, I'm sure our listeners may find it strange that we are as fascinated by Perry as we are, because I
Why
think we
would
are
they?
kind of.
He's fascinating. He's fascinating, man. Look at him. Listen to him. Watch him fight. He is utterly fascinating. Doesn't mean I like him, but he is absolutely fascinating.
One of my favorite Mike Perry memories is him talking about his sponsors and saying, "Welcome to the Platinum family."
I want Mike Perry to hook up with Ally Quinta and also become like a real estate guy on the side. I would love just to imagine Mike Perry selling a house to someone.
God, that is
Oh
just
my
awesome.
God. Mike Perry and
Absolutely.
Ally Quinta could be honey and vinegar. They could be
God.
okay. All right. Well, we'll move on.
That's going to be enough of our daydreaming about Mike Perry and Ally Quinta's realty
I mean,
business.
I'll do plenty more of it after we stop recording, but for now, let's move on. And to do that, I think we're going to need one more break, actually. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get into our thoughts on both of last weekend's notable events, those being Swanson versus Ortega and Lomachenko versus Rigondeaux after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
And we are back. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's talk about Cub Swanson's shocking and sudden loss to Brian Ortega. It's hard to say that Brian Ortega surprised by getting an out of nowhere submission win, because it seems to be all he ever does. But here's something notable I want to mention about Brian Ortega before we get into discussing the outcome of this fight. I'm not yet confident that Brian Ortega has won a first or second round in the UFC. Other than, like, has he? You know what I mean?
Okay, so this was something friend of the show, Phil McKenzie, raised on Twitter.
Oh.
He's like, not just that he hasn't won a first or second round, that he has not won a round on a scorecard
wild. He's undefeated
during his entire time in the UFC.
Undefeated, 5-fight winning streak. That would be 6 if you remember that he popped for Drew Stanalone when he beat Mike De La Torre. So you could say a 6-fight win streak, arguably without winning a round.
Mm-hmm.
on
You could
the
make an
cards.
argument for the second round against Renato Moicano, I think, though I still would have taken Moicano in that one. I think you could make an argument for maybe the second round against Clay Guida, but I don't think so. I still think Guida won that round.
Brandao beat him for 2 rounds.
Yeah. And yet here he is. So I'm trying to think about how to understand Ortega, because he's kind of a weird fighter, not just for that reason, though that's like an incredibly weird statistic that he's undefeated in the UFC and yet has not consensus won a single round in that time. Like he's like somewhere between Joe Lozon and Yoel Romero, where he has more or less Joe Lozon skill sets, in that he's a hyper-aggressive, dangerous submission grappler, but who's dangerous enough on the feet and likes to exchange, likes to be in the pocket, likes to be aggressive, but with Yoel Romero's sense for when is the right moment to explode and do something.
Mm-hmm.
So without he's like Joe Lozon's skill sets plus Yoel Romero's sense for when is the right time to do something.
Plus, I mean, who can you even compare him to that has such consistent confidence in his submissions that he will regularly attack them from a standing position?
Yeah. Well, that's
not
like,
even Joe Lauzon does that very often. I mean, in this fight, he got Swanson out of there with the they're calling it a guillotine. Was it a guillotine for the final finish?
I think it was a guillotine. Yeah,
he got him in the same position at the end of the first round. He pulled him down in a front headlock from a standing clinch and laced up a darce, I think, from that position, but went for a front headlock choke from standing and pulled him to the ground. Who else does that? Like, as a regular tactic?
I mean, Alistair Overeem used to do that snap down to front headlock to guillotine kind of
Chris
thing.
Chris Weidman has done it. I mean, it's something that I've seen before, but... Tony
Ferguson will do it.
That's a good one.
He's kind of like Ferguson, too. Like, and this is a weird... But, like, I don't know exactly what to make of this, you know? I mean, I understand. I feel like I'm watching something special with him in the confidence and nonchalance with which he goes about this. Like, something you see with Lauzon is sometimes if Lauzon doesn't get the submission he's going for, he burns himself out trying to get it, right? Like, he burns his arms out, he gets tired, and maybe he panics a little bit, thinking that, like, oh, that was my shot and I didn't get there. You see that with a lot of, like, hyper-aggressive submission guys, that if they don't get the thing they're going for, panic starts to set in. Ortega never panics. He's just like, oh, okay, that didn't work. But now I have a whole store of information about how my opponent reacts to that submission that I just put him in that I will put to use the next time.
Yeah.
Which, like, and that's the Romero piece that I see in him, you know, that you see in some other really elite fighters at that level, is the sense for you don't have to panic. You're just absorbing information. You're taking this in, and then you're going to find the exact right moment to put that to use. That could be this round. It could be 3 rounds from now. But eventually, that is going to come in handy. That's going to be a useful thing to know about what my opponent is going to do.
Brian Ortega doesn't lose rounds, Pat. He learns rounds. Am I doing this right? Is that? Yeah, that's essentially it. Like, it's almost. It looks on the Bloody Elbow vivisection. Zane Simon and I have taken to saying, you know how there's the puncher's chance. We have taken to calling the same version, but for submission fighters, the choker's chance. And it feels like that plays a huge part in, not that it's chance. Ortega is doing these things deliberately, but it gives his game a very weird resemblance to that of someone like Derek Lewis, where, like, despite not having that kind of, you know what I mean? I'm explaining this badly, but Derek Lewis can go through a fight and say to himself, it doesn't matter if I lose the rounds, it doesn't matter if I lose the exchanges, my main goal is to make sure that I am always still capable at any moment of landing that one punch. And it's like Brian Ortega is capable of fighting that way with a grappler's mindset, where he can repeatedly run into the jab and the left hook of Cub Swanson, where he can be just completely timed. And even though his boxing is improving, it's not improving at the rate that his competition is improving. And yet, he just confidently walked through every single thing Cub Swanson hit him with, slowly got a little better at not quite taking as much damage, and then just when a chance was there, just decided to submit him.
Yeah, like, I mean, so the dynamic that you're talking about, like the punchers or submission artist chance, like, there are better and worse ways of doing that. You know, like there are more and less process driven ways of fighting that way. Like, and it's all about how much information are you absorbing? How much are you learning about what your opponent does to maximize your chances of the next thing being the one that gives you the knockout or the submission, right? Like, because Derek Lewis, God bless him, God love Derek Lewis, and we certainly do. Derek Lewis is not pulling in a ton of information with every single action that you take that's going to give him a better chance of finishing the fight the next time out.
It feels a lot more just like energy conservation for him.
Yeah, it's just every single thing he does is a dice roll, but the odds aren't really changing in his favor when he throws them. With a guy like Romero, it's still a dice roll, but his odds are getting better every time. You know, like there's the percentage chance of him doing the thing that ends the fight goes up. And the same is true for Ortega. It's not that he's just rolling the dice over and over again. It's that he's rolling the dice, but the odds are progressively getting better in his favor because he knows more about how his opponent's going to react, about what he's going to respond to, about what's his when I break his posture in the clinch, what is his response going to be, and what does that mean for my plethora of opportunities to snake my arms around his neck? Yeah, you know,
and I totally buy that comparison, because one of the strongest points of comparison between these guys is that both Romero and Ortega have a penchant for third round finishes. as the fight goes on, even when they're losing all of the rounds up to that point, which is still the really striking part about Ortega's case, they get better at pursuing the openings that in the first round, I think both of them have already identified are there.
Yeah, remember we did this point by point with, we went through like strike by strike and round by round when Romero fought Weidman.
Mm-hmm.
Like we literally went through and identified the various things that Romero picked up on that led to him getting the flying knee finish that were subtle things. Like we tracked his responses to exactly the trigger that Weidman showed him in the first round, in the second round, and then in the third round that led to the flying knee. And you can do that in this fight with Ortega and Swanson's response to the snap down in the front headlock, right?
Yeah.
You can see Ortega pulling in information. That's what makes Ortega special. Is it's not even the submission game that does it. Like there are a lot of guys who have, like, look at Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira has submission skills. He's got great submission skills. He even reads some information about you, but he doesn't get better at sinking in the submission as the fight goes on.
Mm-hmm.
He's not that's not the same thing. He's most dangerous the first time he gets his hands on you. Ortega is the most dangerous. It gets more and more and more dangerous the more he has his hands on you.
Although he is still very dangerous the first time he gets his hands on you.
For sure.
When he snapped Cub Swanson down, he knew the choke was there. He hit it. Swanson was lucky to survive the first round in this fight, despite winning 4 minutes and 50 seconds of that round.
Yeah, that's the insane thing is that, I mean,
Swanson
it's hard
looked
to
good, man. He looked very sharp to me. Cub looked...
This was the sharpest version of Cub Swanson.
He looked
on the
great.
It
kind of breaks my heart because I love Cub Swanson and I love his weird boxing style, and it was in full display in this fight. He was looking on his game.
Did you notice he wasn't overshooting when he was coming in? His defense was sharper. He was placing shots better. His footwork was sharper and tighter. This was a bomb version of Cub Swanson.
And he was doing really tricky shit, like leaving his hands out there because he was fighting a taller, longer guy. So he would get into the pocket with a lead right. And then he would leave the lead right against Ortega's guard to frame him off for the follow-up punch. He was doing some really nice shit in this fight.
Mm-hmm.
And Ortega just didn't care about any of it.
Yep. I mean,
what can you say?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's clear to me after watching this that Swanson still has a lot left in the tank.
Sure.
And if somebody wanted to give him a nice big new contract, UFC, you should give him a nice new big contract because he's still on this level.
Mm-hmm.
Getting snapped down and submitted by Brian Ortega after what Swanson did should tell us that Swanson is still a top 5 featherweight in the world. And
I have a feeling that if the UFC doesn't already realize that, they probably will the next time Ortega does this same exact kind of thing to another good fighter. Because I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of this from Ortega.
Yeah, I mean, so what do you want to see from Ortega now? Do you want to see him get a title shot right away?
I don't. I'm actually still quite interested in seeing Frankie Edgar fighting Max Holloway. I know Frankie Edgar has lost all of his title shots in the last several years, four unsuccessful title attempts in a row from him. But I think he's a really compelling stylistic matchup for Max Holloway. And I still think he is also, like Swanson, surprisingly still kind of at the top of his game. I would like to see what Luke Thomas shouted out on Twitter. And I know this feels like rushing one of our other hyped fighters in this division, but I don't care. I want to see Ortega versus Magomed Sharipov. I'm ready to watch that. And I don't give a damn if that means... I think Magomed Sharipov, specifically with Ortega as an opponent, I think he can compete with him on that mental level. I think he can find ways around Ortega on the feet the way Swanson did, but I'm really interested to see how his phenomenal submission grappling clashes with the game of Ortega on the ground.
Man, I would like to see that fight from a pure entertainment perspective, but if Frankie Edgar is not immediately ready to go, I want to see Ortega in that fight. I think Frankie, God bless him, has had so many shots at this. I don't know. I would be ready to see a little new blood at the top. I don't think with Ortega, he's had 6 fights in the UFC. Mm-hmm. He's been around for a few years. I don't think you're rushing anything with him at this point. Put him in that fight, let it go. And look, Frankie can fight the winner if and when he's ready to go.
Sure. Yeah. I don't think it would be rushing to give Ortega a shot. I think with the position both he and Cub were in before this fight, I think he's earned it. I'm just still interested in seeing Edgar. But if Edgar cannot fight within like the next 6 months, then yeah, why not? I'm with you. Go for Ortega under those circumstances, because like I can imagine Max Holloway just lighting Ortega up, but I can imagine Ortega in that kind of fight finding the opening to get a weird submission.
I think Holloway is the worst case scenario matchup for.
That's the thing. That's kind of what I want to see Ortega against. Like, I want to know how far this train can go. How far can he go being the fighter who loses every minute of the fight he's not finishing his opponent? Can he beat Holloway doing that? Probably not, but I kind of want to see it. Oh. All right. Elsewhere on this card, Cub Swanson still looking good. Brian Ortega still being just as weirdly impressive as before. We'll move on. Elsewhere on this card, we need to talk about the knockout victory of Marlon Moraes over Aljamain Sterling. Before we do, just briefly, I want to give a little shine to my man Gabriel Benitez. He has long been one of my favorite unheralded fighters. I enjoy what he does. And he put on the performance of his career, just befuddling and destroying Jason Knight on the feet, just thoroughly outboxing him. Great footwork, great jab, beautiful timing on his counters and left hands. Really nice defense. Knight was predictable. He didn't look great. I think he's kind of stopped developing and may have even been quite shaken from the result of his last fight being stopped the way he was against Lamas. But Benitez, right time, right place, looked beautiful defeating him. So little shout out to him. How about Marlon Moraes over Aljamain Sterling, Pat?
This was the version of Marlon Moraes we've been waiting for in the UFC. Because even before the knockout, he was going after him. He was throwing 2, 3, 4 shots at a time. He was kicking legs. Like, he was out there doing the damn thing. And maybe he just needed less of a training camp and less time to think about it. Because this was the dude we've been waiting for.
Yeah, could be. I have a feeling it has something to do with the matchup as well. Not that we both didn't think that Sterling could really challenge him, but also that Sterling is just not on the same level as guys like Sun Tzu and Dodson when it comes to like defense, speed, movement, things like that.
Yeah.
Like it's much easier to chase down Aljamain Sterling than it is John Dodson, for example.
Yeah. God, that was a scary knockout. Jesus. That was a terrifying knockout.
Did you see this is not a technical piece of technical analysis, but did you see they posted a video from Fight Pass? If you have Fight Pass, you could find this by choosing the right camera angle and picking the camera that is following Marlon Moraes around after the result. So Marlon is quite worried. I'm sure he's probably trained with Aljo a few times because they both are, like very near East Coast fighters, very near to each other. And of course, Mark Henry has actually worked with some Cerro Longo fighters like Chris Weidman. So he was a little shaken up by that. He was concerned about Aljamain Sterling. Now that we know that Aljamain Sterling is alive and well, I can laugh about the fact that one of the officials who was over there comforting Marlon Moraes, like, no, he'll be fine. He'll get up. And then Marlon starts talking to his corner, and the official turns to the referee and goes, he's out. He was lying to Marlon's face because he too was terrified by the thoroughness with which Marlon had knocked out Aljamain Sterling. It was a vicious knockout, as all head kicks which turn into improvised knees tend to be. But Sterling went down stiff and was out for several minutes. So kind of scary to watch live. That kind of thing always is for me.
Yeah. I mean, so from Moraes, I think this immediately reestablishes him as a dude to watch at the very top here.
Sure.
And not just like he's going to be an elite fighter, but like this is a dude that you want to watch go out there and fight. Which, I think you could be forgiven for not being super excited about Marlon Moraes after his first 2 UFC appearances.
Sure. But again, I'm inclined, like, I don't bring up the style matchup to be hard on Marlon here. Like that allows me to kind of forgive him for not looking like I maybe expect him to in those last 2 fights. Because I think Sun Tzu and Dodson are sneakily some of the trickiest people to fight in this entire division. I mean, definitely Rafael Sun Tzu deserves that reputation. I think John Dodson does too. These are not unbeatable opponents, but people don't tend to look their best against them. Very rarely. Like even Demetrius Johnson didn't look his best the first time against John Dodson. And TJ Dillashaw did not look his best the first time against Rafael Assunção. These are tricky fighters that demand a lot. And Marlon Moraes had very close competitive fights with both of them. So, yeah, it's good to see Moraes like making up for that lost momentum very, very quickly. And in retrospect, it does kind of feel like it changes the flavor of those first 2 UFC bouts. So, yeah, I agree with you, man. I thought he looked great. Really nice movement, really aggressive, throwing combinations. He had Sterling timed from the very beginning, and really just Alger didn't have enough time to turn the fight around before he was put away. Let's talk then about Vasyl Lomachenko's monumental victory over Guillermo Rigondeaux, or should I call him, as he's now taken to calling himself, Vasyl Nomaschenko, because is this the 3rd or 4th straight opponent that he has retired?
Jesus, man. I mean,
that opponent that has been compelled to quit against him.
That was a freaking clowning. So we now know, this just came out, Rigondeaux's hand was not broken.
Oh, I didn't even buy that live. And
I mean, I didn't buy it live either, but now we know he just had like a contusion.
Yeah. And I'm not here to talk shit about Rigondeaux for quitting. Like, I'm quite interested to discuss why we think he might have done that, and why I think now, especially combined with the Nicholas Walters fight, where Walters, another very highly touted opponent, did pretty much the same exact thing after failing just as spectacularly to get any momentum going against Lomachenko. I think it's an interesting discussion to ask, how does Lomachenko do this to people? I don't blame Rigondeaux necessarily for being frustrated, but I didn't expect that, man. I did not expect Lomachenko to just have Rigondeaux's number from the beginning of the fight.
I'll be honest, that actually looked almost exactly how I thought it would, but Rigondeaux was even less active. That's pretty much exactly what I thought the fight was going to look like, was Lomachenko overloading Rigondeaux with information. I thought Rigondeaux would have more success.
I thought he would just bite down and throw. Like, I thought he would have the timing and the tenacity to make Lomachenko pay.
Oh, I didn't. I thought that he would land a couple of shots, but I didn't think he would. I didn't think he was just going to try to bang for to send a message.
No. But I thought he would, in the first few rounds, he would have some opportunities to counter and would take advantage of them. Mm-hmm. Lomachenko shut him down almost instantly.
Yeah. I mean, I thought Rigondeaux would have a round or two. I did not expect it to be quite that one-sided, right. But like Rigondeaux landed what, like 5 punches the whole fight?
Yeah. I mean,
he landed 8. I'm sorry. He landed 8 punches in 6 rounds.
The first time in history, two-time Olympic gold medalists have fought each other in the pro boxing ring, and it was an absolute drubbing. So let's talk about what Lomachenko did. We love praising Vasyl Lomachenko, and it is very hard not to, but I think this fight in particular is deserving of praise, even if it didn't deliver like the excitement that some, frankly, misguided fans were expecting, the action that they might have been expecting. First things first, Lomachenko came into this fight and clearly knew, as he has shown against past opponents, any time Rigondeaux moved his head, he was going to be stuck in place, and that's when Lomachenko could use angles and get around him. The problem with head movement is that defense works when you combine head movement and footwork. You kind of alternate between the two and make them work in concert with each other. When you rely a lot on head movement, the problem is that you tend to plant your feet in place. It's very hard not to, because you're lowering your weight, you're bending your knees, you need to flatten your feet out on the ground and get off your toes in order to have the stability to bend deeply at the waist, the way that Rigondeaux likes to do. Lomachenko didn't even need to see Rigondeaux doing that for a round before he realized that if I can get him bending over, I can basically have my way with him as long as he's bent over, because I can still move my feet and he can't.
Yeah, you can't throw Lomachenko off. You know, like most guys, when Rigondeaux does that, most guys kind of get frozen because they're not sure what they can do to him. Lomachenko, by virtue of the fact that he's constantly experimenting and trying things, was not put off by that. He tried like 3 or 4 different responses to the crouch before he settled on the ones that he liked, which was lever punching, basically.
Yeah, just throwing like 8 punches in a row with his right hand.
Yeah, in order to, because Rigondeaux's defense is both organic and rote, but it's rote in the sense that that the organic aspects of it are predicated on his predictive abilities, right? That like there's a limited range of things that he's expecting you to do, and against an incredibly creative fighter, there's only so much that you can do in response to that. I don't know. I mean, like, the fight was not a great fight.
No,
it did not live up to. Yeah, I mean, but like, all you can do is kind of shake your head in appreciation for how good Lomachenko is and wonder what the next challenge is going to be.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. That's the thing. Lomachenko is at that point now where it's remarkable that he didn't have a great fight with a fighter as good as Rigondeaux. Like, it's remarkable that he didn't have a great fight with Nicholas Walters. It's remarkable that he can take people who are purported to be on his level and humiliate them. Yeah, that's the great point. Like, you can't. Rigondeaux, there were chances for him to let his left hand go in there, but I think Lomachenko also knew that Rigondeaux would just be waiting for him to try to drop the left hand over the top, and so he kind of just stopped doing it and was just like, he would get to an angle, Rigondeaux would be bent over waiting for that left hand to fly, and instead Rigondeaux would be, as if hammering a nail, punching down mostly on the back of Rigondeaux's head. A trick that I am sure he learned from Conor McGregor, by the way. Very disruptive. Hitting Rigondeaux on the nape of the neck and on the temple and everything, but just with one hand, just kind of popping him over and over and over. Didn't have to throw power. That's the thing. He got Rigondeaux to hurt without really hurting him. I mean, I think he staggered him at a couple points with some clean shots at range, but he didn't have him reeling. He didn't have him wobbled at any point. He wasn't putting an insane amount of aggressive pressure on him. He made Guillermo Rigondeaux quit because Rigondeaux felt, after just 6 rounds of fighting Vasyl Lomachenko, that there was nothing he could do. That's crazy, right? Like, that is why everyone instantly thought of Roberto Duran's no mas against Ray Leonard, because it's the only other notable time I can think of in boxing history where a fighter as highly touted as Duran or Rigondeaux, like a top-of-the-heap skill fighter, has been made to feel that they just can't compete. And I don't think that necessarily means that no one has the skills to compete with Lomachenko. I, for one, am still very interested to see him fight Mikey Garcia, among a few other names. But, like, it's almost like the better you are, the harder fighting Lomachenko gets, because he outclasses journeymen and true elites the same way. He approaches them all the same way. He is not cowed. He doesn't respect his opponents at all. You know what I mean? Like, to be a fighter like Rigondeaux or Walters, to be so used to having clear advantages over all of your opponents, fighting Vasyl Lomachenko is a nightmare, because now you are made to feel the way you never expected to feel, that you just can't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Yeah, I mean, so who do you want to see Lomachenko fight now? Do you want to see him fight Mikey Garcia?
I want to see Mikey Garcia, yeah. There was still a small part of me that was holding on hope for the Orlando Salido rematch, but Salido was just knocked out and retired the same weekend in a very, very fun fight. But he just retired. So, like, who else is out there that's really tempting at the moment for Lomachenko besides Mikey Garcia? But
I mean, nobody.
But the question is, does Mikey Garcia even have anything like the right style to beat Lomachenko? Because I still think it's going to be like a more Salido-esque fighter who does beat him. Somebody who can push him back and work his body and force him to react. Don't just let him have the initiative and do what he wants. I'm not sure Mikey Garcia can do that either, because Mikey Garcia is probably going to do a lot of fencing at long range with him. Is Garcia big enough to make that a kind of fight where he can compete skill for skill with Lomachenko? I don't know. I really don't know. Lomachenko is something truly special. He really looks like he's beyond what I expect when I watch even the most elite boxers compete. He's pretty crazy. All right, and that's about it for our show today. Pat, what do you have coming out this week, man?
I have a new episode of Tides of History looking at plague and climate change and how those natural disasters played into the end of the Roman Empire in the 530s. Follow a family of peasants in Italy as their world kind of comes crashing down around them. So awesome. I thought it was a fun episode to put together. It's an interesting topic. It's really like cutting edge kind of history. So want to tune in for that. Check it out.
Great. So climate change. What else was there?
Plague.
Climate change. We're still waiting on plague. How much is the fall of the American Empire going to look like the fall of the Roman Empire, Pat?
That's the $1 million question right now. mostly unspectacular. That's what empires look when they fall. Or that's how empires look when they fall. It's just like a progression of day-to-day shit that adds up to something big in the long run. It's not like you look around one day and you're like, oh, there's an empire, and then the next day like, oh, the empire's gone. It's like day-to-day indignities and idiocies. That's what a falling empire looks like.
So which successor state are you betting on?
The Republic of Texas.
The Republic of... You're going to bet on Texas? Come on,
no,
Pat.
Probably the left coast, I guess.
The left coast. All right. Okay. So we'll see if Pat's right. We'll see. But if not, me and my brethren in the Republic of Texas will crush him. As for me, this week, I'm working on a piece on Loma-Rigo. That's the main thing at the top of the docket now. I got to write something about what I just saw. As we said, it was not a great fight, but holy shit was it impressive and noteworthy what Lomachenko did to a fighter of Rigondeaux's character, so caliber. So look for that from me this week. And otherwise, I think that's about it for us. Find us on social media, all of you lovely listeners. Pat is at Patrick_Wyman on Twitter. And I am at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. You can also find the both of us on Facebook.com/either Patrick Wyman MMA or Connor Rebush MMA. And other than that, check out our work at our respective outlets. Make sure you listen to Tides of History. Check out Pat's other stuff at Deadspin. Check out my stuff at BloodyElbow.com. And we'll catch you guys next week. If you came here for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.